Picture this. It's the 4th of July in Washington, D.C. You've got a sweltering, brutal heat wave, and somehow this directly collides with a fragile military ceasefire in the Middle East and a massive, high-stakes security summit over in Turkey. Crazy, right? Well, these aren't just isolated events. They are converging global crises, and they are playing out in real time. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're mapping out the geopolitical chessboard to really grasp the immense stakes of July 2026.
Okay, let's dive right into this. We're going to cover America's 250th anniversary, the sudden Doha talks pause, the Strait of Hormuz standoff, NATO's looming Ankara summit, and wrap it all up with the true cost of security. Part 1. America's 250th July celebrations.
To really understand this current global tension, we actually need to start on the domestic front. The U.S. is gearing up for its semi-quincentennial, its 250th birthday. But right now, the weather is just completely disrupting years of meticulous planning. It's a blistering 102 degrees Fahrenheit in D.C. I mean, this extreme heat has literally forced the temporary closure of the Great American State Fair right on the National Mall. We're seeing parades getting canceled up in Philly, Amtrak trains are delayed because the heat is threatening to expand the rails, and health warnings are rolling out across all these major cities. But here's the wild part. Amid all this massive domestic disruption, the July 4th celebrations unexpectedly turned into the launchpad for a major international announcement. During his Independence Day address over at Mount Rushmore, President Donald Trump noted that a love for the country, not necessarily where you were born, is what defines American identity. He stated, "You do not have to be born here, but you do have to love what we have built." But then, he quickly used this big domestic celebration to pivot. He went straight into a massive foreign policy declaration about the ongoing multi-front conflict in the Middle East. So let's look at part 2, the Doha talks pause, U.S.-Iran negotiations. This brings us to a sudden, screeching halt in the indirect negotiations between the U.S. and Iran, talks that are being mediated by Qatar and Pakistan in Doha. At that Mount Rushmore speech, President Trump announced that Washington is granting Iran a sudden one-week pause in military operations. This is being framed as a humanitarian gesture to allow funeral ceremonies for Iran's former supreme leader Ali Khamenei to actually take place. Trump noted that Iranian officials are making determined efforts to reach a political agreement, saying, quote, "They are dying to settle." But man, this abrupt pause is incredibly tense. It's basically hanging over the Middle East like a pendulum, freezing all military operations right when regional volatility is hitting its absolute peak. Let's track how this built up and see why this pause matters so much. The war officially kicked off on February 28th. Fast forward to April 13th, and things escalated dramatically to port blockades, the U.S. blocking Iranian ports, and Iran closing crucial straits after those U.S.-Israeli strikes. But then, June 17th brought a breakthrough, the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding. This set up a strict 60-day window for negotiations to permanently end the war. And guys, we're sitting right smack in the middle of that highly sensitive window right now in July. Pausing these talks for a week for the funeral, it's an absolute nail-biter for global markets, especially as the clock just keeps ticking. Which naturally takes us to part 3. The Strait of Hormuz standoff, global shipping risk. Now, what's really interesting here is how hyper-focused global markets are on this one specific geographic location. The economic implications of this waterway getting disrupted are frankly staggering. A full 20%, literally 1/5 of all global oil flows through this single, incredibly fragile choke point. While the U.S. did lift its blockade after that Islamabad agreement, Iran has only eased passage, and they're insisting vessels strictly follow its designated route. So the tension here is threatening to choke global energy stability, and it's putting immense immediate pressure on Gulf economies. And because of this severe economic threat, other global superpowers are jumping in. China has been very explicit with its demands, calling for a proper settlement to end these disruptions and demanding a full resumption of safe and free passage. Beijing is stressing that the international community has shared concerns that require a swift and proper response. This adds a massive layer of international pressure on those mediators in Doha to make absolutely sure these pause talks succeed the very second that funeral period ends. All right, part 4, NATO's looming Ankara summit, July 7th, 8th, security.
So all of this instability in the Middle East is casting a very long, very dark shadow over Europe. The immense tension surrounding this upcoming gathering in Turkey is crystal clear. They're deploying over 56,000 security personnel, police, gendarmerie, all across the capital. We're talking round-the-clock cybersecurity monitoring, heavily restricted airspace, explosive-sniffing dogs, major road closures, the whole shebang. NATO leaders are gathering under an absolutely unprecedented security umbrella because threats on the alliance's southern flank have rarely been more elevated. A massive item on their agenda is figuring out how to secure that vital Strait of Hormuz. Right now, the status quo is completely ad hoc. You've got over 40 countries meeting under UK and French leadership, just trying to hash out some sort of post-war maritime cooperation. But the potential future they're actively discussing in Ankara, that's a unified NATO maritime mission, modeled directly after Operation Sea Guardian over in the Mediterranean. If a permanent ceasefire actually holds in Doha, this unified approach could be NATO's strategic move to step up and decisively protect those global energy lanes. Moving to Part 5, the cost of security, funding global defense. Of course, a unified approach requires funding, which brings us to the financial core of this entire global chessboard. The debate over who actually pays for all of this is probably the most contentious issue NATO is facing today. Historically, we know the United States has shouldered the vast majority of the alliance's expenditures. In 2024, the U.S. covered 64% of NATO's total spending. In 2025, that dipped just a bit to 62%. And this sets the stage for a really intense burden-sharing debate in Ankara, especially since the U.S. has significantly decreased its military assistance to other regions, most notably Ukraine. Because of that decline in U.S. assistance, European allies are basically scrambling, desperately attempting to close the funding gap. Through the Pearl mechanism, allies pitched in $4 billion in 2025 and another $1.5 billion in 2026 just to buy U.S. equipment for Ukraine. On top of that, there's a massive €90 billion EU financial package designed to cover two-thirds of Ukraine's budgetary needs through 2027. And we're also seeing these substantial bilateral packages, like Germany's €4 billion commitment for critical defense systems, which includes Patriot missiles and drone production. So the crucial point here is wrapping our heads around the ultimate scale of this financial burden. To put this into perspective, according to a joint estimate by the World Bank, the UN, the European Commission, and the Ukrainian government, rebuilding Ukraine over 10 years will cost a staggering €500 billion. Let that sink in. That estimate has actually jumped 12% in just one single year, largely because of severe damage to the energy grid. That is the immense, heavy financial strain hanging right over the alliance as they meet in Ankara. Which brings us to the final, looming question on everyone's mind. What happens on July 9th? Think about all these converging crises we've just mapped out today. On July 8th, the NATO Summit wraps up. And at roughly the exact same time, that one-week military pause for the Supreme Leader's funeral expires, dropping us right back into the ticking clock of that 60-day Islamabad negotiation window. Will the heat finally break? Will Donald Trump and the international mediators manage to secure a permanent peace deal in the Middle East? Or is the region, and frankly the entire global economy, teetering on the brink of another devastating escalation? The pieces are all in motion, and the next few days will determine exactly how they fall. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Make sure you keep a very close eye on the news as we approach July 9th.